Story 1. Make all elections federally funded. Pay public officials more. Fine private entities that try to bribe or influence through any form of compensation into bankruptcy. If Washington is supposed to be representative of our best and brightest from various walks of life, then pay them that way. Why be a senator and make $178,000 when you'll make $325,000 or more in the private sector? Story 2. We need to make it so corporations are not allowed to give any money to political organizations. Each citizen is limited to giving $500 to political organizations. Elections are 75% funded by taxes. Story 3. You can't. No matter what law you pass, if you allow people and corporations to amass a certain amount of money, eventually they will overpower all safeguards and laws. Look, it took them, 30 years to undo the New Deal? You think if you re-regulate them, they won't do it again? Every time the working classes get 3 feet ahead, all capital has to do is use racism, homophobia, bigotry, chauvinism, and bam, the working class will be at each other's throat, and they'll vote for anyone who takes their side. Over and over and over again. Story 4. Part of it was a Supreme Court ruling that said limiting businesses in the amount they could participate in the political process was unconstitutional during George Bush Sr.'s years. Before that, there was a $20,000 limit for fictitious entities and political contributions. Now, the Supreme Court has an advertisement on Facebook Marketplace. Story 5. Pass a constitutional amendment that states that corporations are not people, and that money is not considered free speech. Also, within the amendment, make any and all campaign contributions illegal. Make all elections federally funded. Story 6. While corporations have always had influence, the current state of affairs is largely due to the Citizens United decision. If they can reverse Roe versus Wade, this can eventually be reversed. The court held 5-4 that the freedom of speech clause of the First Amendment prohibits the government from restricting independent expenditures for political campaigns by corporations, nonprofit organizations, labor unions, and other associations. Story 7. That is just micro-optimization. If we really want elections that matter, we need some variation of ranked choice or approval voting, so we are not continually in a two-party system. But also, stop insider trading from people at the top. Story 8. Ban all forms of campaign advertising. Require 1 debate per month, every single month up until the election that is televised. Each candidate is allowed 1 personal website. Have a much stronger government-run news apparatus, essentially expropriating Reuters and Associated Press. Story 9. Tie the standard of living of elected officials to the median standard of living of the people. If someone wants to provide gifts for politicians after their term has ended, hold it in escrow for 10 years and put a cap on the maximum amount. Also, make them go through the Veterans Affairs for healthcare. If it's good enough for the people that they ask to lay down their lives for this country, then it should be good enough for them. Story 10. The citizens of this country will never, by any stretch of the imagination, act of legislation, or regulation be able to convince the government to give up power or money. This is the reason politicians become politicians. They want power and they want money. The few that truly entered the field because they want to make America a better place are embraced by both parties simply because they will drag other Americans with them. But in the end, in order to be effective in any regard, they will have to toe the party line of "give me your money." An honest politician is like a worker with a heart of gold. Sure, some may start out that way, but after a few years, you just got another person in the house. Story 11. Think about it like this. You can work really hard to start a political career, move up to a point where you can really start to make changes. This will likely take years. Then, when a billionaire wants to make a deal with you that would result in you clearing 6 figures that year, say no. Story 12. Easy. Just adopt European Union standards on elections and donations to political parties, politicians, and election funding. I am not joking. This would get us 90% there in eliminating this problem. Story 13. Man, that's a tough one. You can't just ask the wealthy to stop benefiting themselves, you know? The whole system is rigged from top to bottom. We could try some grassroots efforts, like getting more regular folks involved in politics or pushing for laws that limit campaign spending. But to speak honestly, it might take some serious upheaval to change things. I'm talking about nationwide strikes, mass protests, maybe even a full-on revolution. The rich aren't going to give up their power easily. It's going to be a long, messy fight if we really want a clean house. Story 14. Create a common fund that each candidate registered in all states and territories receives a portion of, starting 3 months before the election. That is the only money they can use or anybody can use for their campaign. Each penny must be double verified as spent correctly, then implement steep penalties for violations. Story 15. 1. Ban lobbyists. Ban political action committees. Ban donations. All campaigns are legislated to begin no earlier than 60 days prior to an election and are provided with a federal stipend to pay for it. Ban stock trades for elected and campaigning officials. Make the penalty for a company caught influencing an election a percentage of their annual profit, increasing threefold if caught again, with the end result being the nationalization of their company and assets. If an international company, their assets are seized, and they lose the ability to do business in America for 5 years. The penalty for an elected official or campaigning official found taking money is set to no less than 20 years in federal prison. Story 16. I don't have a great answer to the question, but based on many of the answers here, I beg people to actually read some background and the ruling on what Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission actually says. It's fine to have opinions one way or another on the ruling, but too many people seem to have played a game of telephone when learning about Citizens United because some of these claims being laid upon it are insane. Story 17. You don't? It's just how life is. It's just people being people. Either accept your reality or head down to your local sporting shop and decide to be the change you want to see. Story 18. Replace the current government and political systems and embrace a system similar to those in various European countries, where it's practically impossible to have a two-party race. Story 19. Abolish lobbying. I would even go so far as to make it punishable by death. Complete financial disclosure of all elected officials and their families, including organizations, nonprofits, bank statements, tax returns. All this must be turned in by March 3rd, prior to the election, to be considered eligible. House and Senate rule single-issue spending bills are required. All spending bills cannot be longer than 1 page. Every budgeting session of Congress shall have the current tax revenue for the year displayed that will change to reflect the current spending amount. The session does not end until the budget clock reads an amount greater than $0.05. Internal Revenue Service and Federal Reserve will be forensically audited. If any criminality is found, the organization is abolished and all debts owed to them are forgiven. A 14% flat sales tax on all new, non-essential purchases for citizens, businesses, and organizations is instituted. We all know the Internal Revenue Service has committed crimes. We will switch to a new currency that is backed by commodities. The Treasury will assume the role of currency creation and all other duties previously filled by the Federal Reserve. All voting will be done on paper and handled exclusively by the National Guard to be hand-counted. There will be complete disclosure and live broadcasts of the counting to the public. Voting will only occur by citizens of this country who can show adequate government-issued ID and are on the National Guard-managed voter rolls. All states must coordinate to have all local, county, state elections on the same day annually. This day is a national holiday. Heavy fines will be imposed on businesses and organizations that do not allow time for their employees' time and resources to vote on said holiday. Story 20. What about labor unions? Easily a much bigger source of campaign cash. For more information, refer to National Review's article about how unions spent at least $1.8 billion in the 2020 election cycle. Story 21. You remove the ability of the government to pick winners and losers or to redistribute wealth. The less power the government has, the less power it has to sell to the highest bidder. Story 22. You can't because voters put politicians in power based on how they feel instead of doing research on how the politician will actually act. Assuming you are in the US, those politicians then set up Citizens United, stacked the courts with biased judges, and over decades, pumped billions into all facets of government to secure their interests. Now, they have a greater percentage of the wealth and power than at any time in history. They've divided voters into two little camps and made them think the other is the enemy. There are indeed two camps, the ultra-high net worth people that run the biggest corporations in the world, and everyone else. You may ask, why can't we just vote them out? Reverse what's happened. We can't even agree that Nazis are bad. We buy into the propaganda and talking heads on the media. We listen to influencers instead of scientists. We ban books. I'm sorry, but there's no way back here. They won. Absent a revolution, nothing will change no matter which party is in power. Story 23. Have shorter stays in official positions, or probably an unpopular opinion, but don't allow people to become career politicians. Do a term and that's it. Story 24. It is not just about elections. It is about politics in general. Two Supreme Court rulings would have to be overturned. 1. Money spent being equated to free speech. Corporations being equated to an individual. This one baffles me more because they are not held accountable like an individual citizen but gain all of the protections. Story 25. Guillotines. Barring that, pack the courts, overturn Citizens United, ban dark money, ban super political action committees, end the revolving door between office and lobbying, and that's a decent start. Story 26. Billionaires, oligarchs, kleptocrats are an abomination and should not exist. Trying to tax billionaires after allowing them to exist is like allowing people to have private nuclear weapons or private slave armies, and then trying to tax them. The game is already over at that point. It's not going to happen. It is beyond insane that all of humanity has been brutally enslaved by parasites and kleptocrats, with no real legal or institutional recourse against them. Any system that allows billionaires, oligarchs, kleptocrats to exist can only be an increasingly illegitimate abomination. We can have democracy in this country, or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both. Justice Louis Brandeis. Story 27. Eliminate them. It's well beyond the point where we, as people, can do anything. They have captured the judiciary. So, even if we all got together and found enough House members and senators to pass laws to limit their power, the court could just rule whatever they do to try to rein them in would be declared unconstitutional. Note for people: I am not advocating for individual violence against people. I'm just making the observation that it's time to sharpen guillotines before the cake runs out. Also, yes, I know her quote does not actually say, "Let them eat cake." Story 28. The most influential lobbying group in the United States is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, and politicians on both sides are on their payroll. Stopping them can easily be called anti-Semitic. Story 29. You don't. You can't stop them from running public service ads designed to subtly influence public opinion. You can't stop companies from running ads on television, which are really bribes to report the news in a slanted manner, especially pharmaceutical ads. You can't stop the entertainment industry from designing storylines to make people feel a certain way. You can restrict direct campaign contributions, which we already do. Unfortunately, the more subtle and less direct methods are the most effective. Story 30. You also bar politicians from engaging in the public marketplace. Insider trading doesn't seem to be scrutinized for members of Congress. It has just turned into an old folks club to get your insider information and make a substantial amount of money. There are very few people in Congress with a heart for serving the community. Story 31. I find it interesting that nobody has mentioned changing the way Supreme Court judges are appointed. Many other countries aim to have nonpartisan judges that focus on the law, not the politics. They are selected differently, and their rulings are not as predictable as United States rulings. Story 32. Use the most democratic method available. Draw lots. If you are eligible for jury duty, you are also eligible for representative office. This makes monetary influence for elections impossible, and our Constitution is extraordinarily well written to remove troublemakers who do get into office when both sides don't turn politics into a team sport. Imagine having a truly representative republic where people put the country and the people first because political parties have been made obsolete. Story 33. Enact term limits on all elected officials and judges. It's the only way. Money and influence will always be in politics. Sucks, but it's the sad reality. Term limits are essential so you don't have politicians in there playing the long game. Story 34. Practically speaking, you can engage in grassroots activities such as making calls, going door to door, or going out in public to talk with people, as well as registering people to vote. These activities don't cost much. You can participate in them with others, and they can actually have a real impact. If you don't have any experience or are not sure what to do, find a candidate or cause that you believe in and volunteer, and you'll learn pretty quickly. The reason I mention this is that everything else that can be done is more or less out of your hands. This, however, is something that you can actually do, and depending on how much effort you put into it and how well it goes for you, can have a real impact and help you gain real leverage. This is fundamentally different and arguably more potent than the influence of paid media.